Well, it's 1 o'clock, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Why don't we just take a second to reintroduce ourselves, although you probably know us. My name is Justin Reich, and I'm a faculty member at MIT, and I run a research group called the Teaching Systems Lab, and we're really interested in how teachers and librarians and other kinds of educators learn throughout their careers, particularly online. And we were so thrilled to partner with folks at the Stanford History Education Group to help put this course together on Civic Online Reasoning. You all probably know Joel and Teresa from the previous webinar and from their work in the course, but for some folks who might be new, why don't we just ask each of you to do some quick introductions. Joel, maybe you can start.
Sure. Thanks so much. My name is Joel Breakstone. I'm the director of the Stanford History Education Group. Before my work at Stanford, I was a high school social studies teacher and first did work around history curriculum with SHEG. And for the last few years, we've been focusing on figuring out how young people make sense of online information and trying to create tools to help them do better at it.
And Teresa?
Yeah, I'm Teresa Ortega, also with the Stanford History Education Group, and have been working on Civic Online Reasoning for the past, I guess it's been 5 years now, with the research, curriculum development, assessment. So excited to talk to everyone today about what they got out of the course.
Good. I think a great place to start would be if we could ask the attendees to, if you've already done this, if you can repost it. If you haven't done it yet, this will be a chance to think it through. There's an exercise in the forums, which is I used to think, but now I think. To write a sentence using the structure, I used to think, da-da-da-da, but now I think, da-da-da-da. I suspect many of you have done this already in the forums. Some of you may not have had a chance to do that yet, but it'd be great if in the Zoom chat right here, people could just post their I used to thinks, but now I think. What are some assumptions or ideas or beliefs that you brought into the course, and how have some of those things changed? And if folks can type that into the chat, then we'll have a body of reflections from the folks who are here to be able to talk with and start from. While you all are doing that, we'll do two things. I'll do one short bit of logistics, and then we'll ask Joel and Teresa to talk about a study which just came out today, and to help us see a little bit more about how this research on civic online reasoning continues to grow and develop. I would say the two main things you need to know logistically for wrapping up the course is on November 15th, that's the last day that everything is due. So you can work on anything on the course up to that point, especially if you're a verified participant on the verified track. And up to that day, you'll be able to do it. And then at something like, midnight that day, all the assessments in the course will turn off. You'll still have access to the course materials after that. But if you don't finish things by November 15th, then you won't be able to earn your certificate, at least this round. The second thing is, as you do wrap up the course, when you more or less finish up the things that you were working on, please take the post-course survey. The post-course survey is now active at the end of the course, and we want everybody to be able to have a chance to give us some feedback about how the course went for you, what you learned, those kinds of things. And your contributions to that will be enormously helpful for us as we revise this course and as we make future courses. So if you go in the course menu, you'll see it's the last item there, and it would be great to have everybody fill that out. So lots of good I used to think, but now I thinks are showing up, which is great, but let's give slow typers a little bit more time to add to the body of work. And in the meantime, Joel and Teresa, you have a new study that's out today, which I think which I didn't even know about. I just saw it on the Twitters this morning. But I think it's exciting that this research continues. And I think the learners in this course will be excited to learn what we're continuing to try to figure out. So maybe you can give us an introduction.
Absolutely, yeah. So we just released a new study that describes work that we did in a large state university where we asked college students to complete a set of tasks where they were evaluating online sources, some of which will be familiar to course participants. One of them was minimumwage.com, which shows up in the course as well. We also asked students to look at a supposed news story that was actually from a satire website. And unfortunately, overwhelmingly, students were unable to identify the satire as satire, that if they did something as simple as laterally read about the name of the organization, they would have found a disclaimer saying that it was a satire site. 2/3 of students did not do that and accepted it at face value. And with the minimumwage.com example, which is supposedly a non-part coming from a nonpartisan nonprofit research organization, but was actually run by a Washington, D.C. PR firm that was working for the food and beverage industry, 95% of students never made that connection back to the PR firm.
95%.
95% did not. Yeah. So it was very few students were able to make that connection. So those results are concerning and are very much in line with our previous research showing that young people from middle school to college struggle. But what really stood out from this research was not only the difficulties that students had, but it was also the strategies that they did use to evaluate the sources, and that it wasn't as though students simply said, I don't know. They tried to use strategies, and the strategies that they attempted to use were the same kinds of strategies that we often tell students to do. They matched up with the kinds of advice that is offered on college and university websites from all across the country, things that appear on the CRAP test, things like pay attention to, is it a .org, or what does it say on the about page? These strategies that actually led students astray. So it wasn't just that students didn't know how to do it, they were doing the things that have often been offered up as effective strategies, which really points to the need for us to rework the way that we teach young people and all of us how to evaluate online sources.
How does this study build on previous studies? Because you've done similar kinds of things with, I forget exactly, I think you Stanford undergraduates. What was I think expansive research programs like yours are trying to sort of fill in lots of different bricks in a wall to create a sort of comprehensive perspective. What were some of the missing pieces in our understanding of this field that this study like particularly fills in?
Yeah, so this one was really focused on what do students do, right? So previously we had primarily focused on this question of could students do it? And this time we were really wondering about what are the strategies that students are adopting to evaluate the sources. And what stood out was that they were trying to evaluate them, and they were falling into these same patterns that matched quite closely with these with the kind of advice that is widely available in on college and university websites, which underscores this need to rethink the way that we teach students, and so that it's not just that students can't do it, it's we've taught them the wrong thing. So that was definitely the frame for this work.
And you did that by, did you do the sort of cognitive task analysis you've done in the past, like videotaping all of these students?
No, so we just asked students to complete them, then we coded all of their responses. And so it became very clear very quickly that they were using these same strategies over and over again. So students would say, well, the about page says that they are a nonpartisan website. And so we were just looking at their written responses, and those same patterns became very clear. And then we went and looked at what's the advice that's available on college and university websites. And so if you can go and find the exact kinds of strategies that students are employing on websites like Northwestern and Cornell and the list goes on and on, right? And so in the report, we've called out, sort of the kinds of advice that we've seen being offered up, and the way that it matches up with how students are approaching these tasks.
I'll just add that a university as well known and as prestigious as Princeton has updated their webpage this month, and they still include a 1998 article from Jim Capon about web evaluation. So we are teaching students at places like that how to evaluate the web in essentially using the tools of the web's Paleolithic era. And I want to do a shout out and kind of remind people, of something that I would imagine that you already know and intuit, that the changes that we're seeing with colleges and universities that are really getting on the ball are places like Rowan University in New Jersey and University of Louisville and Stonehill College, which is an hour south of Boston. The change is not coming from the kind of big fat institutions necessarily. They're coming from incredible initiative shown by college, university librarians and information specialists at places that maybe are not, the Ivy League. So I just want to do a shout out to the many, many good people that are doing incredible work that often doesn't get recognized.
Teresa, was there anything else from this study that you thought was particularly striking to you or particularly important, or some other color commentary?
I mean, I think that one of the differences of just the assessments that were used in this study was to present students with an outright fake news article, right? That a lot of the coverage of our research has been about fake news. And, that's sort of used as an umbrella term for misinformation and disinformation online. But a lot of our assessments are about things that are a bit different, cloaked websites, or sponsored content, but this one actually did include something that looks like it is a news story and in fact is satire. And so I think that finally we have actually shown that yes, students are unable to identify fake news from real reporting.
And I would just add, the only other detail is sort of that this runs counter to a narrative that is still quite alive, that that Gen Zers, because they grew up with devices, are incredibly efficient at evaluating online sources. There was just a Politico article last week in which they said, that the Gen Zers don't have this problem. It's older people who are sharing fake news, and that they have strategies for discerning truth from fiction. And this is just another case of the evidence does not support those kinds of claims, and we should not assume that the ability to use a device well equals the ability to make sense of the information yielded by that device.
So Eric asked the question, why do you think it is that more institutions are not getting on board with this? Like what seem to be the sticking points in changing people's teaching and learning approaches to this?
I think first of all, I think that we need to call attention to the problem, that there is a tendency on college and university websites. We have another study that's coming out about the kind of information that they provide. They tend to pile on information. It's sort of like an archaeological tell, where there are layers of previous civilizations piled one on top of another. It's sort of this idea that the more resources that you offer, somehow the better, even if those resources are internally inconsistent and confusing to, a college first-year student or a sophomore trying to figure out, okay, what's best practice for figuring out truth on the web. So I think, again, we have to look to the vanguard, to those institutions that are really approaching this in a different way, and eventually, hopefully, the top-tier institutions will catch up.
Great. So lots of great reflections here in the chat of people's I used to think, but now I think. What are some perspectives that they brought into the course, and how have some of those things changed? So I think it would be great to reflect on some of these. I think they're very representative of other thoughts that we saw in the course forum, and maybe it'd be interesting to hear if they're representative or not of some of the other things that you've heard as you've taught with other folks. One theme that came up in a couple of these I used to think, but now I think comments, is something like, I thought that the strategies that I was teaching for evidence evaluation would be pretty universal. But now I think that the strategies for evidence evaluation on the web are pretty specific to the web. Does that sound right to you all? And why, why is it that the kinds of things that we would teach in a history class about evaluating primary sources or secondary sources aren't translating into the web environment as well?
It certainly matches up with our experience, that it's not a one-to-one match, right? And that it goes back to some of the original research that that Sam and Sarah McGrew led with the fact checkers and the historians and the Stanford students, that there was this thought that historians evaluate sources all the time, and that this is their expertise, and so that they will do well when we give them these sources. But that research showed quite clearly that the historians also struggled to evaluate these online sources. They did better than the Stanford students did, but they still paled in comparison to the fact checkers. And it speaks to the ways in which the internet and sources online is different than reading print text, and that the strategies that historians use to make sense of print text do not apply and do not work as well on the web, and that there's this need to use the web as a web and to go out and search for other sources, and that is the most efficient way to do it when you have access to other information. That reading carefully is not the way to come to an efficient conclusion and an accurate conclusion when you're encountering sources online. And so that research showed quite clearly that there are good ways to approach it online. The fact checkers had some of those strategies, lateral reading chief among them. And so that's why the fact checkers came to better conclusions more quickly.
It was Lucia Boschetti who in this particular group wrote it as, I used to think that exercises about evaluation of historical sources enabled straightforwardly students to evaluate online sources. But now I think it's necessary to teach specific strategies and make them explicit. Teresa or Sam, other thoughts on that translation?
Of going from print text to the web. Listen, again, I really want to emphasize the idea that somehow we're not taking ourselves out of this audience. We've been fortunate enough to do this research, so we've been exposed to how professional fact checkers cut through a lot of the stuff that's on the web. But I don't want it to sound like somehow we know we are somehow superior. Listen, technology has moved so quickly and changed so rapidly that we are all playing catch up. And so I think that by recognizing that is the first kind of step toward improving the kind of decision making we make in an unvetted information stream. Again, I'm old enough to remember 3 different television networks that basically said the same thing. Or for many, many years, including into my adult life, I got a print newspaper sent to my door. This is a very different world that no longer exists. And so you go on and you have a curated feed based on algorithms that track everything that you do and feed you more and more stuff. And we know from kind of the Tufecci's work that the algorithms try to get more and more incendiary stuff because that keeps our eyeballs on it. People don't understand the way that algorithms work for personalization. They don't quite understand why they get more and more narrow news sources based on what they've already viewed. And so a lot of this is sort of learning how to regain control of the tools that are now controlling us, to kind of paraphrase Thoreau. And it's going to take a while. You asked about what that new research offers. Again, I think that there's still a lot of belief out there that somehow it's people like me with gray hair that are having a difficult time, but our college students, they were born with silicone underneath their fingernails. And I think that we have to distinguish between the ability to, create an iMovie and upload it, and the ability to check out a claim, for instance, that, Joe Biden's son is whatever the latest thing that the administration is putting out. So again, I think it's gonna take time, and the strategies that we are trying to put out are kind of first generation strategies, and we hope that we will continue to improve, because again, the web is a constantly moving project.
Anne asked a question. I'd really like to hear you talk about how core strategies connect to and build on historical thinking skills. I mean, we've just been talking a bit about how they're different, about how like doing the reading like a historian curriculum won't necessarily prepare you for searching for things online. Neither will growing up in internet culture. Are they just sort of side by side complementary things? What do you see as the glue between them?
I think that there are opportunities to connect the two, right? I think coming back to this, that the initial comment around this idea of needing to make explicit, how are they similar and how are they different, right? That at the heart of historical thinking is this question of sourcing, of where did this information come from, and that certainly holds true in both contexts, but you just do different things in those two contexts, and so I think there are lots of opportunities to connect the two, and also to develop lessons that provide opportunities to do both, right? And that there are ways for us to engage in historical thinking using online sources, but we want to do different approaches in terms of evaluating sources depending on our purposes. And so there's this initial piece of, should I trust this source as a source, right? And that's going to be the application of these core skills of deciding whether or not it's a trustworthy source. Once I've decided it's a trustworthy historical source, then I can engage in more of the historical thinking and deciding about how I think about it in historical context. But I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't spend my time reading it and engaging with it as a historical source until I know that it's a trustworthy one. And so I think
that's a great piece of like sequencing.
Exactly, sequencing and being clear about what my purpose is, right? At this point, I'm just doing an evaluation of this as an online source of deciding whether or not it's trustworthy, and so of my purpose and what am I doing here and why.
Another connection, if folks haven't seen it, there's a great interview with Valerie Ziegler, who's a teacher who's worked with Chegg materials for a while. And I think she answers this question to some extent in her interview. For her, sort of images were really a powerful place of overlap between the two curriculum. And the interrogating images like a historian was also a good place to introduce sort of interrogating the images that students encounter every day in their social media. I'll give another, I used to think, but now I think that has come up a whole bunch, which is actually quite distressing to me, but perhaps understandable, is the sort of like the broad understanding of Wikipedia among educators. In part because, I was doing some work around information literacy, like in the late 2000s, where we were trying to say, hey, like there's some sort of reasonable things to be able to do with Wikipedia. It's not a perfect source for all things, but it's a great first starting point. As you can see in this thread, and as you can also see in the forum online, in a lot of school communities, Wikipedia remains verboten, some decades later, despite, I think, a lot of folks trying to communicate, hey, there's some pretty good things you could do with this, like fact checkers use it. I remember distinctly, whoever was the executive editor of the New York Times before Dean Paquette, I think he wrote an op-ed piece about how he donated to Wikipedia because he basically used it every day. I was like, look, if the executive editor of the New York Times is using it every day, this is a pretty good source. Like, why is that message so hard to communicate more widely? And what can we all do to help with our colleagues, with other people, to help advance better ideas about civic online reasoning?
I think that was one of the biggest surprises that at least for me, when we went and interviewed fact checkers in between Washington, D.C. and New York City. We can't tell you the names of the publications, but if you were to guess, you would be right. And on the tasks that we provided, when we showed them, for instance, minimumwage.com, and they immediately went to Employment Policies Institute, their first move was to just quickly go to Wikipedia and see what Wikipedia said. I think that it kind of floored us because it was not the kind of thing that the Stanford students did. The Stanford students lingered on a page and deeply believed in their own intelligence to discern whether it was a reliable or an unreliable source, and consequently wasted about 6 or 7 minutes with their critical thinking skills, when there was a rather kind of immediate, what Mike Caulfield calls a head and mirror check, a very quick thing of putting Wikipedia in the search bar, and immediately you see that the Employment Policies Institute is talked about as a conservative institute, and then you jump down to the references, and you get a New York Times article, you get a variety of articles that talk about it as a PR firm that masquerades as a think tank. And so again, these are the kinds of things when we are in an information environment where it's information overload, and we have to make fairly quick decisions. Again, in the 2016 election in California, there were 16 different initiatives on the ballot. I'm not sure how many there are on this new ballot, but I'm sure there are an awful lot. If an average person spent 10 minutes on each, it would be quite a feat of yeoman citizenship. The question is, are we equipped to make those 10 minutes count? So Wikipedia is not perfect. There's a lot of criticism to it. There's criticism about who the Wikipedians are. It's overwhelmingly male. It's overwhelmingly white. That reflects a lot in a great deal of the entries. And so it is very imperfect. And yet the kind of beliefs about Wikipedia, for instance, that anybody can change it. Well, look at the entry of gun control and try to go on there and change it. It's, Wikipedia, I think, has somewhere between 15 and 17 different kinds of locks or protected pages at this point. So I think that's something for us to do, Justin, for MIT and Stanford to go together, and let's see if we can come up with a really good short curriculum for how to use Wikipedia for quick fact checking. I think to come up with a curriculum like that for middle school and high school, I think would be a great benefit to curriculum development.
I agree. So that's the next grant we're going to write. We're on it. I'm there. And Melissa agrees too. She can be on our advisory board or a collaborator. Here's one other question that I wanted to ask you about teaching. Tell me if this resonates with your experience. So I taught last semester a class of 25 MIT students in Introduction to Media Studies. And one of the things we did some lateral reading stuff. And one of the things that I said was, where did you learn search skills? Like what search skills do you use and where did you learn them? And I was quite surprised at how many people were like, I didn't. I received no instruction about this. And so it just makes, so one theory is that they don't remember because they're children and whatever, they're young people, and so that's fine. But another theory is that they really didn't have much instruction in it, but then they still ended up using similar strategies to the ones that were sort of teaching people wrong. Like I'm thinking about the people in your state university, and you sort of insinuated that maybe they were doing the wrong thing because they'd been taught the wrong stuff. But it strikes me another possibility is that they hadn't been taught at all. And somehow what they're intuiting is the same wrong thing that people intuited 20 years ago. Does that question make sense, or does it have any?
Except that the students not simply made their choices in the study that we did, but they wrote down why. And so we had a common trope that kept on coming back of, I always learned that you should be suspicious of .coms and .orgs are trustworthy. And that is a finding also that we saw in our responses when we did a national survey of close to 4,000 high school students. This thing about .org, which you can find on Northwestern's page, on Princeton University's page, on Harvard's page, I'm going to leave MIT and Stanford out of it. We could, physician heal thyself. This thing about somehow .org is credible. Well, we looked at the organizations that are labeled hate groups by the Southern Poverty Law Center. 49% of the hate groups have .org URLs. So, You know, the thing that, and again, the most common thing that we see on college and universities is that .orgs are equated. They are synonymous with nonprofit. Wrong. Your border collie, your chihuahua can go out and get a .org tomorrow. .org has always been an open domain. We've got to stop telling students to judge a site by its top level domain.
It's incredible how durable, you know, the example that we were using in the mid 2000s was martinlutherking.org, which was a Stormfront, a white supremacist fronted site that for a long time was one of the top 10 responses.
Stormfront is .org.
Yeah, yeah, Stormfront, which is a white nationalist group in the United States. It's not, I don't know if it's a group or just a chat board, but they're white. They're avowedly white nationalist.
I think just to add to what Sam was saying, and also to come back to that initial question or the response from your students of saying that they had not been taught it. I think often it's not that it was formal instruction, right? That there wasn't a time when they got a instruction about Wikipedia, but that it's often in offhanded remarks of, you know, don't use Wikipedia, remember, or this is, you know, that there are these pieces that come up and are given in less structured places of, and that it's not that that the issue often is that schools don't have a formal curriculum about this, but rather it's, you know, somebody is, you know, a teacher is talking about going on the web and they say, and remember, you know, .edus are good, right? Or it's the small pieces that go along. And a big piece of it is that the instruction, that there hasn't been better guidance out there. And so the things that are on that crap test and have stood, you know, as the guidance for people out there. And so it's not a coincidence that those are the things that get transmitted to students, because that's what's floating around for all of us, right? And you know, as Sam was saying, you know, it's not as though we knew better beforehand. It's, you know, we've been diving into this work and now see quite clearly the limitations of it. But, you know, I certainly, as a high school teacher, made those same comments about Wikipedia, you know, 15 years ago. And so, you know, the issue is also that Wikipedia has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. And so I think a big piece of this is replacing these outdated approaches with better materials and making it widely available and helping people to become aware of it.
One question that came up from Kate, well, it's a statement that I'm going to turn into a question. I've been wanting to bring this work into my high school students, but it's difficult in distance learning settings. I just wondered, Teresa or others, have you talked with teachers over the past few weeks who have been finding interesting ways of making this work in the strange world of remote learning that we're in?
Yeah, so, you know, too early to have sort of best practices. And of course, everyone's context is so different this year, especially. But all of the materials are available through Google Forms or Google Docs. And so we've heard from a lot of educators that that's been really helpful for easily integrating these into their learning management systems. And that because students are spending even more time online, that they're trying to prioritize helping students to evaluate the information that they're finding there. So, you know, we've heard a lot of great things, and some of these comments were also in the forums about people using things as sort of bell ringers, whatever that might look like on Zoom for people now, you know, doing an assessment and seeing how students are doing to get sort of a temperature check of how they're thinking about sources online. And also adapting some of the lesson plans to align to their curriculum in terms of the content that they're covering. So definitely know that this is a especially tricky year to add even more curriculum to people's instruction, but we have heard that people are having some successes with doing so, even with remote learning.
And in our interview with Mark Gomez, who's in Unit 4 of the course, and he's a social studies coordinator in Salinas Unified. I mean, one of the things that I thought was compelling that he said was that part of the reason why they felt that they were going to be able to ramp this up this year, and we haven't been able to follow up with them to find out, was just that there was a lot of student demand for it. That as students were, you know, doing more research on their own, feeling more independent, doing things by themselves. I mean, I think, you know, you make a really important point, Teresa, that it's very difficult in the midst of a pandemic with a lot of changes going on to ramp up what it is that we're asking teachers to do. But he thought that there was some evidence that one of the reasons why he thought he and his teachers could do more of this was because it was something that teachers were really looking for. What other, if other folks have questions, feel free to post them in the chat here. I know I want to ask at least one more question, which is a kind of, where do you think folks should go from here? Having finished this kind of first round course, what are some ways to continue your learning in this topic? What are some ways for people who've talked about sharing with colleagues? What are some good ways of doing that? What suggestions do you have for, if you want to do level 2 of this course, what should people be looking for?
I mean, one thing that stands out for me and from our work with teachers over the last couple of years in particular is that students need a lot of practice to do this well. And that the idea, for instance, of lateral reading is pretty straightforward, but it takes a lot of content knowledge to do it well, to make sense of the information that you encounter when you do that lateral reading. For example, we had a student who read laterally about an organization that engaged in climate change denial. And they read laterally and they found the Wikipedia page that indicated that the organization is connected to fossil fuel companies, and that should have given everything they needed to know that it was probably a problematic source. But they instead focused on the fact that the organization was a nonprofit and had $1 million of revenue, and they thought it was trustworthy as a result, because they didn't have a sense of thinking about who are their funders and how that influences their consideration of it. And so I think part of it is giving students lots of chances to practice, and that doesn't have to be lots of extended lessons necessarily, but keep on giving students moments to evaluate sources, and to give feedback about what are the effective strategies, and to have them discuss what's working and what are some of the challenges they're running into, because the only way to develop that repertoire of approaches is to do it a lot. So I think that's definitely one way to move forward.
Right. In a study that we just finished up, actually, it was a study that we finished up several months ago, but we just readied it for publication. It was of our large field study in Nebraska, where we implemented this across a variety of high schools, and students through Civic Online Reasoning skills, they did improve. But again, let's be clear that there's a bottleneck here. We call it the background knowledge bottleneck. If you are laterally reading and you can't distinguish between the Pew Research Institute and Breitbart, and those are both like you have no awareness of them, then lateral reading is not going to help you that much. And so there's knowledge about sources that kind of traditional news literacy organizations, they're absolutely right. You have to be able to distinguish among sources about which one is truly nonpartisan and which one is clearly partisan and a cheerleader for advocacy. So to some extent, the kind of background knowledge that schools have been teaching since time immemorial is something that enhances the ability to make wise choices when you engage in lateral reading.
Stephen just asked an important question, which is, can we share the stuff in this course? And I typed it in there, but wanted to emphasize again, the answer to that is definitely yes. All of the materials that we made uniquely for this course are available under a Creative Commons CC BY license. Almost everything on the Sheg page is available under a CC BY or a CC BY share alike. And then it's also quite easy to share the crash course videos and the links and so forth there. So would definitely encourage people, the way that we set up the practice spaces too, you can really just take the links from those and share them with people. We also have a document in the course called the Practice Space Sharing Guide, which gives you some ideas about facilitating those practice spaces with your colleagues and having them encounter those ideas. And so, for folks who are interested in using the materials in this course as a base to share with your colleagues and things like that, we welcome and encourage you doing that. a couple other questions came up. One was about what we know internationally. I think we might have even talked about this the last time we got together, but let's refresh again because it came up again. Is there any kind of evidence about, do you have any research on how civic online reasoning skills transverse cultures? What do we know? Do we know anything there so far?
Well, we can talk a little bit about the work that we've done in India, where we worked with an organization called Freedom English Academy. And we brought our materials to New Delhi and started to talk about lateral reading. But we realized we needed, with these students who were computer literate, we needed to take one step back, which is first to get them almost automatically to ask the question when they look at any kind of post on social media, to ask the question first, who created it? To reconnect the idea that there's a message and a messenger. And that was a kind of the first step. And I think we sometimes jump and assume that students realize that messages are created by different groups with different interests. And we really needed to emphasize there's a way that our eyes deceive us, particularly when something looks medical and something looks official. And again, I think we should stop and say something about the way our adults looked at the webpage of the American College of Pediatricians, which is in our practice spaces, that there's something about seeing a site with an official logo, an official name, written with a scientific abstract with scientific references, that extinguishes our ability to ask the question, what really do we know about this group and what could their agenda be? So yes, we've done some work in India. We've also done some work in Colombia. But again, these materials have to be kind of translated into things that really make sense in a local context.
Great. Anything else on that, Teresa or Joel?
I would just add that many of the pieces are, the ways that people make sense of the information is very similar, right? Of that this basic inclination to accept information at face value online has been very similar across cultural contexts. Certainly, the materials need to be adapted for particular contexts, but many of the issues are very familiar as we look at what's happening in other countries.
The only other thing I would add is that, and this isn't something, this isn't a context that we've worked in, but my understanding is that in some countries, Facebook is basically the internet for them, right? That if you get a smartphone, it is preloaded with Facebook, and that is sort of your main navigation. And so I think we have lots of reasons to think that in those contexts, it could be even harder. What is lateral reading in that context? Is it even possible to read laterally if you don't have access to an internet browser outside of Facebook? So lots of concern about the added difficulties in those different contexts. Yeah.
That's a great question. Tom asks, is there any research in the connections between poor online reasoning skills and the online preoccupation with conspiracy theories and counterfactual history? Do you all, what connections do you see between the widespread rise of conspiracy theories in this historical moment and your findings about the limited civic online reasoning skills? You could let us know if you think there's any research. You're also free to speculate.
I don't have we haven't researched issues of conspiracy theories specifically. I think part of the challenge is that online information of varying quality can appear the same, and that the distinctions between quality and sham are much harder to detect, and that anybody who has access to a web template can create a site that looks comparable to trustworthy sources, and that contributes to some of the challenges. Is that individuals who are putting out deeply problematic content have the ability to make it seem like it's coming from a credible source and to reach enormous numbers of people. So I think those are do contribute without a doubt.
I will say one piece of research that I know around this comes from a person named Judith Doneth, who was at MIT and then affiliated with the Berkman Klein Center for a while. And I don't know if I'll be able to find it very quickly while facilitating, but she has an argument that people share things that they know to be false for the signaling value of it. That it's basically a way of communicating your membership in a group. And so, that was, to me, what's at least interesting about that argument is the idea that not all spreading of fake news and misinformation is simply a matter of not being able to recognize things as true or false, but that there can be like particular values that are embedded in communicating false information, which is just to say, like with a lot of things, civic online reasoning bites off one part of the problem. If people are really determined to like use conspiracy theories to to undermine public confidence in a shared reality, then no amount of lateral reading training will fix that. But it can fix, there are parts of it that it can fix. And so we need to work on that. Well, this has been a very productive discussion. I'm very grateful to Teresa and Sam and Joel for joining us. Sam, as all of us have right now, is dashing from one Zoom call to another. So we're grateful you could breeze in. Working with Joel and Teresa and Sam on this has just been an absolute pleasure. Seeing all of the learning and sharing that you all are doing, it's been really exciting throughout the forum, seeing not just the ways that people are doing this work with their students, but with their neighbors, with their family members, with their parents, with their friends, other things like that. And I would encourage you to keep doing that. I definitely got emails sort of as the instructors of the course from other folks saying, I've got some colleagues who I just can't get to like believe this stuff. And so I've been sending them to your course to try to build up those skills. Again, I want to remind you of these last two logistical things. Please take the post-course survey if you haven't done that yet. It's really enormously valuable to us. Most of you about 6 months later will also get a follow-up survey from us, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, something like that. And so, the more you can share with us about what you're doing and about how your experience is changing, that's really valuable to us. And then again, remember that November 15th is the last day to finish materials of the course if you want to earn a certificate. So there's still plenty of time. We extended the time on all of the assignments for another 3 weeks or so. And want to give you all time to finish up. For those of you who are able to join us today, thanks for asking your questions. Thanks for sharing your I used to thinks, but now I think. And for those of you who are watching this as a recording afterwards, let us know. If there are any other lingering questions, about the substance of the course, feel free to get in touch with any of us. Julie asks, can we start the course now and catch up? Absolutely. You can absolutely binge take the course. There's a few parts of the assignments which ask you to do some teaching. But, strictly speaking, they don't actually require that you do that teaching. Elizabeth asks that too. For a bunch of them, you can do exercises with your colleagues. You can make a plan for things and talk about how you're going to do that plan. We're not sort of double checking people's implementation on things. You'll get the more you actually take the materials in this course, bring them into classrooms or with colleagues or with other people and try them out, the more you'll get out of it. But don't let that be a barrier. And then for those of you like Chava with logistical questions, the best thing to do with that so we can get the right person helping you is to send an email to cormooc2020@gmail.com. And then we'll route your query about verification or other things to the best person on our team, which is probably not any of the three of us, to be able to respond to that particular issue. And if anybody else has any difficulties or any other issues, use that. And of course, feel free to reach out to any of us or me. I'm also just jreich@mit.edu, and I'm happy to chat with all of you. Great. So Fawn has the final question, which is, does Teresa play the ukulele? Or should I be laughing? Because the background might be photoshopped.
I do not. My girlfriend does, but I do not.
All right, so we're gonna have to have a celebratory concert from your girlfriend at some other date. Terrific. All right, thank you, everybody. Wonderful to have you join us, and looking forward to staying in touch. If you need help in the last 3 weeks finishing things up strong, we're very happy to support your learning and grateful for you being here. So thanks, Joel. Thanks, Teresa. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everybody.